When it comes time to do one of my weird episodes, there's a specific kind of weird that I usually look for. Generally something unexplained with a somewhat unresolved ending to it. Something that creates more questions than answers. A lot of the time I really like that because it makes you think. Like look at when I did the Bennington Triangle or the Mothman. There's no explanation for either one of those. There's no resolution to either one of those cases. The Khamar Daban incident checks a lot of those boxes, and then a few more. I've been sitting with this one for quite a while, and I'm still not fully satisfied with any of the explanations, including the ones that actually sound reasonable. And I'm going to give you all of those and let you decide, because that's the honest thing that I can do here. This isn't Dyatlov Pass. I know that that's the first comparison that everybody wants to make. I'm going to make that comparison too, briefly. But I want to be clear that Khamar Daban is its own specific kind of monster. It's way more disturbing than the Dyatlov incident because, at least with the Dyatlov Pass incident, there was no surviving witnesses. What happened on Khamar Daban in August of 1993 was seen by one living person who walked off the mountain and tried to tell people what she saw. And what she described as something that I'm still trying to process myself. A young girl stood on the northern side of the river, screaming and waving her arms desperately, pleading with me to save her. That was Alexander Kavinsky. My name's Kevin. This is History Goon. The Khamar Daban mountain range sits in the Republic of Buryatia in southern Siberia, and it runs roughly parallel to the southern shore of Lake Baikal, which, if you're on Patreon, you're going to get that with this one, because that lake is so goddamn weird that it gets its own episode. We'll talk about it a little bit here. Don't want to spoil anything, but it's weird enough that we're going to talk about it. Lake Baikal is the deepest lake in the world, and it contains about 20% of the Earth's unfrozen fresh surface water. If you've ever seen pictures of it, it's absolutely stunning. One of the most beautiful places on the planet that can kill you without a second thought. The mountain range itself is not technically extreme by any kind of mountaineering or climbing standards. The highest peak tops out at around 2,500 meters, which is pretty small compared to like the Himalayas or even the Alps. Matter of fact, we're going to do our really early ADD break. So just for comparison's sake, any of my folks on the East Coast, this place is about 400 meters taller than Mount Washington, which is really nothing. And if you've ever been up Mount Washington, it's a lot steeper than this mountain is. People have died on Mount Washington, I think like every year for the last 100 years trying to hike it, because it is brutal. You get the wind, you get snow when you're not expecting it. And if you've ever been to the top of Mount Washington, you know that you can go in August when it's 85 degrees at the base, and you get up there and it's 12. It's absolutely gorgeous, but you couldn't pay me to hike up Mount Washington. What this range lacks in altitude, it makes up for in extreme weather. The Khamar Daban is pretty well known for rapid, violent atmospheric shifts. It's a high mountain range. It's going to happen. Conditions that are stable in the morning can become lethal by afternoon. It's a pretty popular tourist hiking destination, which means it gets enough visitors to have like an actual established like trailhead and infrastructure and um, little spots where you can stop, like lean-tos and stuff like that. Again, if you've ever hiked any part of the Appalachian Trail or the Long Trail in Vermont, that's pretty common. Here's something that matters later. The surrounding region, including the Khamar Daban Range and Lake Baikal, have a really well documented history going back centuries of what locals called, well, I don't think locals call it, I think scientists in the area would call it, anomalous phenomena. We're seeing lights beneath the ice, lights above the water, compasses going completely haywire and not giving you any sense of direction whatsoever. Electronic equipment failing in specific areas, which that could have actual explanations for. Russian paranormal investigators have categorized multiple sites around Lake Baikal as anomalous zones. We're not going to talk about that too much more because I really, really, really want to get into that on Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. The Buryat people who are indigenous to the area that have lived alongside Baikal for thousands of years have a lot of like deeply rooted tradition of mountain spirits in this mountain range. Spirits that are not necessarily friendly to outsiders. Do with that what you will. I'm not going to try to force you to form an opinion on that. I'm just putting that out there so that you know that it exists, that people that have lived here for thousands of years take this seriously. And again, this is not like the normal wheelhouse for stuff that I do on here, but every once in a while I like to get into unexplained stuff because I also take it very seriously, because I don't think that there's things out there that we can explain or that we will ever be able to fully comprehend when it comes to things like this. The Earth is a very, very old place, and there's a lot of very, very old places on it. Ask people in Appalachia why you don't whistle after dark outside, or why if something knocks on your door or taps on a window at night that you can't see, that you don't respond to it. In August of 1993, Russia was 2 years into the post-Soviet chaos, which it's chaotic now, but it's going to get much better. Probably for Russians for a little bit. And then, other stuff happens. It's like, current events happen. The Soviet Union has dissolved as of December of 1991, and the country is in the middle of an economic freefall for the most part that would eventually produce like hyperinflation, widespread poverty, and a very particular type of oligarchy that would shape the decade. Think Lord of War, where he goes into all these warehouses and he's buying all these guns to sell to African countries. And he's talking to all these generals that run the stock houses. That money's not going back to Moscow. That money is going into that man's pocket. And people like that became insanely rich in Russia. So you traded communism for gangsterism, which is better than communism, because at least these guys have morals. They might not be good people, but they have morals, And another big thing that started happening with this free fall is that emergency services are completely underfunded and tragically understaffed. Bureaucratic response times are no longer a priority. And that matters for what we're going to get into later. Let's talk about our cast of characters. Ludmila Korovina is 41 years old, and she was a bad-ass bitch. She'd been a wilderness survival instructor since the early 1970s. She's completed dozens of expeditions in some of the harshest terrain in Siberia, which is some of the harshest terrain in the world, because Siberia, like I've said before, is basically Hoth. And she is pretty widely regarded in Russian outdoor educational circles as one of the best in the business. She trained under the Soviet system, which meant that her methods and upbringing made her uncompromising, to say the least here. She demanded physical strength, mental toughness, obedience, and resilience from her students, and she had absolutely zero patience for weakness or stupid people. So she's not just going to let any Tom, Dick, and Boris join this expedition. Students that trained under her describe the experience as actually challenging and hard. She's not a woman who valued comfort or doing things the easy way. She was the kind of person that you would want to lead you through something like this, because she's not just physically tough, she's mentally tough. And when you're in a situation like this that may turn into a survival situation, spoiler alert, you need that. You need somebody that can see through the bullshit and chaos and go, okay, let's lock it the in and get out of here alive. Her 6 students were from the, I'm going to butcher these names because I don't speak Russian, the Petropavl Azimuth Tourist Club in Kazakhstan. So these aren't just random people, like I said. They've been training together, which is super important when you're going to do something like this. And they've been training for a very long time. And they were all hand-selected by Korovina for this trip. Our group consists of Alexander Kresin, who's 23. He's the oldest of the students. He's very experienced, in very good shape. Again, the kind of person that could probably lead something like this after a few more years of experience. Tatiana Filipenko, who's 24. Denis Savachkin, who's 19. Valentina Utchenko, who's 17. Victoria Zelasova, 16. Timur Bapanov, who at 15 years old is the youngest member of this group. And again, obviously we have Korovina herself leading the expedition. They set out on August 2nd as part of the larger expedition. There's 3 separate hiking parties operating in this same area with plans to meet up at a pre-planned point to, I think so. If I remember correctly, I think they're all starting from 3 separate spots. They're going to meet at one spot and then continue the rest of this journey together as a bigger group. One of the groups was led by Korovina's own daughter, Natalia, who was on a separate route with her students doing the same thing. They all had maps, they had compasses, they had radios. They had enough food for each of them for over a week. The weather's good. Daytime temperatures are in the teens Celsius, which, for everybody that uses a correct measurement system for heat, the teens in Celsius is anywhere between 50 degrees Fahrenheit and 68 degrees Fahrenheit. I would consider that perfect outdoor weather, but I'm also a heavy bastard. I am from the Northeast, where 50 degrees in November or March is t-shirt weather. 50 degrees is t-shirts and shorts for me. 68 degrees and sunny is baseball weather. That is absolute prime weather to be outside in. The temperatures would dip down to about freezing overnight. So 32 degrees. That's still not bad. Outside at night, it's going to feel worse than that because it's cold and the sun's not out. There's also no storm warnings. So everything is fine. Everything is perfect. Nothing bad could possibly happen. Right? Well, they reached the summit of Retranslator Peak without incident. They were on the descent on August 4th when the weather turned on them. The rainstorm that hit them on the descent off of the peak on August 4th was severe enough that the group couldn't light a campfire. It's raining hard enough that you can't start a fire and keep it going. It's raining pretty good. Anybody that has ever tried to light a campfire when it's wet and damp will tell you that it sucks, because there's nothing more that you want to do than start this fire and dry out and maybe cook something, because you're cold, you're wet, and you're miserable. And if you can't get a fire going, you get a little pissy. At least I do. In Siberia in August, at elevation, with wet gear, wet wood, and temperatures dropping at night, you're not going to have a good time. And the inability to start a fire is not a minor inconvenience. This isn't like you've got your notepad but no pencil. This is a problem. They made camp and they ended up getting through the night. And in the morning of August 5th, they managed to build a fire, eat some breakfast, and then set back out on the trail. They're supposed to meet Natalia's group at the rendezvous point the next day. Natalia's group shows up and waits, and they wait some more, and then they waited even longer. Korovina's group never showed up. Natalia's group, which included some of the missing hikers' relatives, would eventually just move on, assuming that the other group had been delayed by the weather and, some wet equipment. They're fine. They'll get us at the end. It's okay. If we can get 2 of the 3 groups together, we're good. And besides, Mom knows what she's doing. She'll get them there safely, right? Right? Yeah. Korovina's group was not delayed by the weather. Here it gets a little tricky with sourcing. What follows is Valentina Uchenko's account from her police report from 1993 and a subsequent interview that she gave in 2018, both of which contain certain different details. I'm not going to pretend that the 2 versions are identical, because they're not, and you should know that going into this. 1993 to 2018, that's a lot of time. Sometimes you remember things that you didn't remember before. Sometimes you forget things that happened. Happens to everybody, At its core, though, what she described is consistent across both accounts. And this is what follows. The group was descending at approximately 2,393 meters elevation when Alexander Christen, who was at the back of the group, started screaming. She says that when she turned and looked back at him, he was bleeding from his eyes and ears. He's frothing at the mouth. He fell to the ground convulsing and then went still. Now, frothing at the mouth and convulsing and then falling down sounds kind of like a seizure, maybe a stroke, something like that. Bleeding from the eyes and ears, I don't think is normal for a seizure, but let me find out quick. Okay, so after a very quick Google search, bleeding from the eyes and ears is not a typical symptom of a standard stroke or seizure. These conditions primarily affect the brain. While they can cause symptoms like vision loss, dizziness, or confusion, they do not generally cause blood or physical leaks from the area. So, Dr. Kevin, physician, has decided that this was not a stroke or a seizure. As you can tell, I'm a doctor with my tiny apartment and my day job. That's not being a doctor. Korovina ran back to him and tried to help him regain consciousness. And a moment later, she cried out and started showing the same symptoms. She convulsed, she collapsed, she bled from the ears and nose, she landed directly on top of Christen. Tatiana Filipenko was the next one to reach this spot. She reaches Korovina and tries to help her. As she's trying to, Filipenko starts grabbing at her own throat and saying that she couldn't breathe. She crawled to a nearby rock and started bashing her head against it until she went limp. It sounds like a pretty cut and dry case of we didn't get enough sleep. We're a little sleepy, right? We had some bad canned food. Somebody didn't poop before they left. You know, typical things that would cause you to bash your face into a rock until you die. Victoria Selisova and Tamir Bapanov, the youngest two, at 16 and 15, just ran. I probably would have done that at 15 or 16 years old. You just freak out and you're like, holy crap, what's going on here? And as they're running, they both just collapsed and died. They're vomiting blood, clawing at their own throats, tearing their clothes off, and then they died. Denis Savechkin ran with Valentina. Shortly after, he collapsed and started convulsing. Valentina kept running. She made it to the tree line. She got down below the tree line, sat down, and waited for whatever force of nature that was there to kill her. And it didn't. She waited, and nothing happened. At some point, she went back up to the scene to check if anybody had survived and found everybody was gone. They're all dead. She collected what supplies she could and then started following the power lines and ran through the area, moving towards the bottom of the mountains. That is the smartest thing she could do. If you're ever lost in the woods and you come across power lines, don't leave them. They will bring you to civilization eventually. And also, if you're in the mountains and you're going up the mountain, going down it, pretty smart too, because you know that there's stuff back there. There's like towns and people and, shit you can do. But if you keep going, the mountain is going to kill you. She walked for 4 days. On August 10th, a group of kayakers on the river at the base of the Khamar Daban mountains saw something a little strange. A girl emerged from the tree lines. She stopped when she saw them and just stared at them. When the kayakers got close, they froze. She is covered in blood. They finally got a chance to talk to her. They got her to calm down. They find out her name is Valentina Uchenko, and she was 17 years old, and she was the only person left from her hiking group. So the kayakers did the smart thing and beat her to death with an oar. No, they didn't. They took her to the police. The police would take the initial report from Valentina after she was rescued on the 10th. A formal search didn't start until August 24th, 14 days later, during which time 6 bodies were sitting on a Siberian mountainside in the heat of August. Guess what heat and moisture does to a human body? By the time the helicopters were dispatched, it took 2 additional days to locate the remains because Uchenko's account was too broken to give like a coherent, precise location where they were. All she knew is they are that away, up the mountain, the direction that I don't want to go because there's like a Soviet Wendigo or something up there. The bodies were found basically in the exact same state that she explained they were in. They're all partially undressed. They're scattered across like the route that she came back down. And during an autopsy, they all showed signs of bruised lungs. The official cause of death from the autopsies were 5 deaths by hypothermia, 1 death, which was Korovina's, by heart attack. And they attributed that to malnutrition, which, this is post-Soviet Russia. You've got food. They had food. So unless all they brought with them was like Skittles and potato chips, she probably didn't die of malnutrition from a heart attack. So take a second to just sit with that. We have 5 people who, according to the only living witness, were bleeding from their eyes and ears, frothing at the mouth, convulsing, and bashing their heads against the rock, and they officially died of hypothermia. That's kind of where the Dyatlov Pass comparisons start. Because some of those people had crushed rib cages and they're like, pah, hypothermia. They had squeeze wounds, like, avalanche. No. So this perfectly healthy woman that saw the first person in her group die and ran to help him died of a heart attack from running, like, I don't know, a couple 100 feet maybe. I don't buy that. But again, this is post-Soviet Kazakhstan, which today their government's kind of fucky still. I mean, the hypothermia part though isn't completely baseless. The partial undressing is consistent with something that I've brought up before, paradoxical undressing, which is kind of like one of the later stages of really bad hypothermia, where parts of the brain that regulate temperature are so damaged that blood vessels in the limbs dilate, and that causes it causes the heart to like flood your extremities with blood, creating a sensation of heat. People in this state start ripping their clothes off because now I went from freezing to death to 190 degrees Fahrenheit inside, like a chicken breast. The bruised lungs are also consistent with severe hypothermia in some situations. Now, again, I don't have to Google this part to tell you that hypothermia doesn't cause you to bleed from your ears and eyes, or froth at the mouth, or go batshit crazy and slam your head into a rock until you're dead. The speed from the first symptom to everyone being dead seems like it was only a couple of minutes. Hypothermia, unless you are butt-ass naked in the Arctic, takes hours to set in. At 32 degrees, you would have to be, again, naked and soaking wet for hours to get hypothermia. The official findings have never been matched with what the survivors said. The investigation is closed. Nobody was ever charged because this wasn't a crime. This case sits in a specific category of like post-Soviet Russian history, where the answer to why didn't anybody investigate this is it's 1993, the country's going to shit, there's no resources, and nobody really cares because we have more important things to worry about than dead hikers. Sorry your family member's dead. So now here's where we get to grab a menu and go through the options. And we'll start from, obviously most plausible, because that's the best place to start. Because if not, it's boring just talking about the crazy stuff up front. So let's start with the easiest one. The group was wet and cold from the night before. They're already physically exhausted. The stress of the storm caused just a flood of like physiological responses. Your brain's up, your body's up, you're wet, you can't think well. Hypothermia set in rapidly in the altitude. Paradoxical undressing. Ta-da! There you go. The bleeding and frothing were either exaggerated in our witness's story, because she's clearly traumatized that everybody's dead, or were secondary symptoms that were not reflected in autopsies due to the state the bodies were in 2 weeks later when they found them. Problem there is the timing's wrong, the speed is wrong, the bleeding is wrong. Uchenko's account has been consistent enough across that 25-year age gap that dismissing it entirely it would take a level of commitment to sticking to the official story that the evidence isn't really there to support. The next one is like the most widely discussed, like, alternative, and it's not as crazy as it sounds. The Khamar Daban region sits in an area of Siberia used pretty extensively during the Soviet Union for military testing and water disposal. Lake Baikal has got a documented history of toxic shit being introduced to it during the Cold War and all of that. A Soviet chemical weapons program, which produced the Novichok family of nerve agents in the 1980s and 90s, didn't just operate at like known facilities. Because believe it or not, the government likes to hide things, especially things they're not supposed to be working on, like, I don't know, chemical weapons. Plum Island off the coast. That little one off the coast of Lyme, Connecticut, where the first documented case of Lyme disease came from, and that's why they called it that. Because Lyme disease occurring in nature isn't as bad as the version that we have now. Kind of like something else that happened that occurs naturally in nature, but it wasn't as bad as the one that we got that shut the world down for basically 4 years. I can still see those videos of Chinese government agents in white jumpsuits locking people in their apartments. Man, being a millennial's fucking wild. We've seen everything. We've been through the end of the world like twice at this point. So testing and disposal of this stuff happened in a lot of remote areas. And Siberia is a lot of remote areas. The symptoms that Ovchenko described, the rapid onset, the frothing at the mouth, bleeding from like mucous membrane areas, convulsions, death within minutes, are all consistent with something called organophosphate poisoning. Organophosphates, which include nerve agents like the Novichok and sarin gas, not gas, but just sarin in general, work by blocking the enzyme that turns off nerve signals. Yeah, not great. Every muscle would fire simultaneously and continuously until the victim dies of exhaustion or asphyxiation. We're going to talk about another guy that did something very similar to that here in a couple weeks. Won a Nobel Prize for it, sort of. And with this whole pile of shit that's going on with the convulsions and all that stuff, and the frothing and bleeding, your throat closes up. And that would cause you to try to claw at your throat, trying to get yourself to breathe again. So one of the details that we didn't get before is that she skipped breakfast that morning. In the context, like, if the vector of this poison was contaminated food or water, and everybody else got a hold of it at breakfast time except for her, that could kind of explain why she survived and they didn't. Problem there is, the autopsy didn't confirm any of that. And toxicology screenings would have detected any of those organophosphates. Because, believe it or not, in my lifetime, sarin gas has been used on people. And it may or may not be part of the reason that we went to Iraq in the first place. Then they've got that incredibly dangerous, that needs to be very well regulated substance, that oil stuff that everybody needs. They got a lot of that. And we should probably keep an eye on that, right? Like, maybe we'll take it over here. We'll store it like in an Indiana Jones warehouse and make sure that we have it and you guys don't. Whether the autopsies were actually thorough enough, given the state that the bodies were in and the resources available in this little rural area in 1993, I don't know. Not many people have said yes or no to that. It's probably going to be a no. This would be like living in a town of 400 people and having a murder committed, and then bringing in like a crime scene team from a big city that already has a backlog of stuff to deal with. And by the time they get to yours, they've lost evidence. Sorry, we don't know what to do. And if there had been a nerve agent in the location, why didn't she show any symptoms after returning to check on these bodies? If this was airborne and people just walked through like a cloud of spores that had this stuff in it, and then they died and it's on them, then when she went back to like touch people's stuff that was also on them, why didn't she pick it up? There's no answers to this question. And also nobody cared enough to actually look into this to see if there was another issue here. Another thing that we can look into is the Khamar Daban range is home to a plant called Aconitinum sucacevi, which is a member of the aconite family, also known as monkshood or wolfsbane. And in Siberia, there's like a variety of other potentially toxic plants in that particular area. Aconite, which is the active compound, is a sodium channel blocker that causes cardiac arrhythmia, foaming at the mouth, and rapid neurological failure. Wolfsbane is also was pretty commonly used in like poison-tipped arrows for hunting and executing people in ancient times. But another thing that wolfsbane was used for through a lot of mythology was repelling or killing werewolves. I'm not saying that this was a werewolf, because I think she would have noticed that. What I'm saying is that this is some kind of ethereal, ghostly werewolf that she didn't see. Okay? That's where my brain's going at this point. It's really not, but I just thought it'd be funnier than some of these incredibly boring explanations that they have so far. But this stuff, if like processed to use as a poison, can be absorbed through like skin contact, mucous membrane stuff, so like your eyes, mouth, or if you're dumb enough to ingest it like that, and it acts incredibly fast. There are reports that the group foraged for food during the hike, which was a pretty common practice back during the Soviet era when our leader was going through stuff. And aconitum roots are supposedly really difficult to like distinguish from other edible plants in the same environment. But again, somebody that's as experienced as our group leader, I think would be able to figure that out. But if multiple people in this group had handled it or consumed any of it during their foraging, so this theory would actually explain the speed of the onset of all of these symptoms, including the cardiac event that allegedly killed Korovina. Aconite poisoning is one of the few natural agents that can actually cause a very rapid death with the kind of presentation that Ochenko witnessed. And again, she skipped breakfast. If other people were exposed to it during that and she wasn't, she wouldn't have been dosed. This is probably, when it comes to natural explanations, among a lot of the researchers, the most plausible. But I'm also not a toxicologist. I hang drywall for a living and unclog toilets and defrost freezers. So I don't have that kind of bandwidth to come up with an answer like that. Just like cracking open a book and be like, yes, it's wolfsbane poisoning, like a wizard. Okay. Another fun one that we're going to get into here, and this is where it starts getting a little harder to pin it down to something natural. The next one that pops up is infrasound, which are sound waves below a certain wave frequency, which is, I think is like, from what I could find, like 20 megahertz. I'm sorry, 20 hertz. And these are below the range of human hearing. Infrasound can be produced a couple of different ways. There's certain like topographical and meteorological conditions that can cause it. Like wind hitting a ridge at just the right speed, at just the right angle can cause it. At certain frequencies and intensities, infrasound is known to cause disorientation, nausea, extreme anxiety, feelings of dread, panic, and paranoia. Think like the brown note without shitting yourself. And this is actually like something that they've documented and they can measure. They can create this and use it on people to experiment to see how it works. Or wrap it into a big green box and then turn it loose on protesters, called an LRAD. Look that up if you ever want to. So to jump back to the Dyatlov Pass comparisons, there's a version of this theory that is almost identical with Dyatlov. Because it's like a similar mountain range and they get similar types of weather and wind and all that. So it's plausible, right? Now, another thing that they didn't mention in this whole story with infrasound is that certain large animals can produce infrasound. Meaning, so if you've ever been to like a zoo or anywhere near a large cat enclosure with tigers in it, they can growl at a frequency that you can't really hear, but you can feel it in your chest. I've experienced that, and it is terrifying because you already have, 2,000-pound cat that wants nothing more than to eat you alive, dick first, but it can also do that, which just freezes you in your tracks. And another animal that can produce infrasound are large apes, like gorillas, and potentially other large uncategorized apes that people tend to think of as mythology. And some encounters that people have had, they've mentioned that if they've come across the Sasquatch and they could feel it making noise instead of hearing it make noise. I have to do Bigfoot stuff at some point. There's so much. If you guys want me to do Bigfoot shit, let me know, because it's in my brain and I can just poop it out and put it together in an episode, But here's a more extreme version that applies specifically to this region. Some researchers have proposed that infrasound at specific resonating frequencies doesn't just cause psychological effects like we talked about, it can cause internal organ damage, including pulmonary hemorrhages at the correct frequency. The bruised lungs found on all the bodies is the detail that keeps this version of what happened going. Bruised lungs on multiple victims with no impact injuries and no other clear physical injuries at all is kind of weird. Infrasound researchers point to this specifically and regularly as something that could cause that. But it doesn't explain the bleeding from the ears and eyes. It doesn't explain the foaming. It doesn't explain the paradoxical undressing. And there's a lot of things that it doesn't really get into. Another one that they talk about is geomagnetic disturbance, which I am not smart enough to even pretend I know what that meant when I first read it. The Baikal Rift Zone is a geographical structure that created the lake itself, and it sits on one of the most active fault systems in the entire Asian continent. Localized geomagnetic anomalies in rift zones like this are documented. They can prove that these happen. Some researchers have proposed that concentrated geomagnetic disturbance at altitude could potentially cause neurological effects, including hallucinations, extreme disorientation, and in severe cases, hemorrhage from small blood vessels, including the vessels in the eyes, ears, and nose. This one kind of overlaps between the scientific and paranormal, depending on who's talking about it. Russian researchers have documented compass anomalies and equipment failures at specific locations in the range, including on routes that experienced guides described as producing unusual feeling, like being uneasy, just uncomfortable, feeling like something's not quite right. Whether that's geomagnetic interference, effects of altitude, or something else, nobody's really formally investigated that. So I'm going to be a little bit of a dick, and I'm going to skip that whole anomalous zone thing, because most of that focuses on what is in, under, and around Lake Baikal. Because I want to do that on Patreon when I cover that to come out with this episode. So, this part is the most fun for me, because we are going to get into the Buryat mountain spirit traditions that these people had. The Buryat people have lived alongside Lake Baikal and in the Khamar Daban range for thousands of years. Their traditional spiritual belief system is like a form of, think shamanism. It holds like specific mountain ranges in the area to be inhabited by unfathomably powerful spirits. Some actively protect people, while some are outwardly hostile to outsiders who enter this whole area without acknowledgement of who actually controls it. The Khamar Daban has specific locations that Buryat tradition marks as places where outsiders should not go, or should only go after a proper ceremony to, again, acknowledge these spirits and let them know that you are not there to cause any harm to their domain. So if you want to take that seriously, I kind of do. I like that theory a lot, because that's where my brain goes, because I'm one of these people that when I go out in the woods, I always get that feeling that I'm being watched and I can never see what it is. I mean, there's stuff up here that you can't see all the time. Like we've got bobcats and we've got coyotes and we've got foxes. We've got wolves. We've got mountain lions, even though the state of Vermont Fish and Wildlife will tell you that we don't have those last two, even though I've seen both of them in the town that I live in. But I think that there's things in the woods that we can't explain, whether they're physical, whether it's some kind of a nature spirit of some sort. There's something there that I don't think science can come up with an explanation for yet. Or they have one, but they don't want to use it. Like, for example, the big reason that a lot of scientists don't want to acknowledge the existence of a potential large primate in the woods of North America is because that would do a couple of different things. First, it would destroy your logging industry. Because if you have the evidence, which I believe they do, that there is a potentially endangered or, threatened species in the woods, that kills your logging industry. If people find out that there's something like that out in the woods, that's going to kill your hiking and camping industry, because nobody wants to go out there and find out about it. Just a theory. It's not mine. I've heard it from a bunch of different places where that's why people think that they will not acknowledge that stuff like that's real. Because if we can't build a pipeline, because it'll destroy a species of, naked-assed mole rats or something, then what are we going to do when we have an intelligent species in the woods that we have to protect, that we can't destroy their habitat for, that we don't want to stuff in a zoo because maybe they're a little bit too much like us, you know? I think that there's potential there for that. And I also think that there's way, way, way too many stories that go way, way, way too far back from damn near every tribe on the continent that they've had contact with something like this. So this isn't just something that a white dude made up that we have to be like, well, we have to think about it more because there's the potential that this is real, because there is the people that were here before us, before we knew that this continent even existed, that were seeing stuff like this. And it's not just here. They have sightings of this stuff in Asia, like China, the Himalayas, and in Russia, and in Kazakhstan, and in the Middle East, and in South America. If you're seeing it all over the goddamn place with people that never had contact with each other that are making a very, very similar description of this thing, what are the chances that it's fake? Maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you'll listen to this and go, this guy's dumb. I'm not listening to his show anymore. That's fine. That's fine. I will tell you that people that know this landscape that we're talking about, that have lived there for as long as they have, and they've got a very intimate relationship with their environment, know that there's things going on. And they know that there's certain areas that you just don't go to, and maybe they can't explain why. It was the same thing with Dyatlov Pass. The natives named the place, don't go there, in their language, for a reason. Okay, now let's get into the military testing zone theory. This one is considered a fringe theory. There is zero documented evidence of this. That the hikers accidentally wandered into or onto a nearby classified Russian military testing site, and they were exposed to something and they were eliminated to prevent them disclosing anything. The timing in 1993, immediately after the Soviet Union collapsed, with all this chaos and stuff going around, we've got the military transitioning from, again, military leaders to guys that are essentially becoming gangsters and making a bunch of money. There's not a lot of accountability there, and leadership is basically non-existent. And this would kind of make a cover-up more plausible in a certain sense than it would if this had happened in like 2003 in Russia, when Russia was kind of chill, not really doing much crazy stuff. But the problem with that theory is this group was on a well-documented, standard issue, popular tourist route. There's signs on this trail. If it was a classified military area, the only sign is going to be, turn around now or we will shoot you, but in Russian. And there's no evidence that there was an active military area there at the time. More importantly, if someone is going to try to like suppress this, why would they have let one witness go? You know, like if you're shooting these people with some kind of like brain gun that's doing this, you're not going to let one of them not get it. That's just stupid. But the one detail that we come back to that doesn't fit anywhere was Tatiana Filipenko beating her brains out on this rock. I've gone through all of the theories that are listed, and none of them explain that one particular death. And they chalked hers up to hypothermia still. I mean, some of the nerve agents are going to cause convulsions. but most likely not direct self-harm, unless this is, again, some Joe Ledger supervillain type of disease that they've released, like a rage virus. Read those books or listen to those books. Ray Porter is amazing. And Jonathan Mayberry is my favorite author of all time. Like, he beat out, like, H.P. Lovecraft. And that's saying something. I love that guy's work. And a lot of the weird virus and disease related stuff that he puts into his books is based on real stuff that could potentially be weaponized and used against a populace. That's why I brought up the rage thing, because he has a book called Rage, where it's basically short-term weaponized rabies that's transmitted through either bites or airborne methods. And it is scary as hell to think that everything that he put together for this particular disease is all stuff that actually exists and could actually be combined and weaponized if we tried hard enough to kill the entire planet. Aconium will cause cardiac and neurological failure, but not that specific kind of behavior. Hypothermia can cause confusion, but not enough to make you smash your head into a rock on purpose. Infrasound causes panic and disorientation, but it's not that. Geomagnetic disturbance has no documented behavior that presents in that way. What Uchenko described is a person who, like, in their final moments of life, crawled to a specific object and deliberately smashed her head against it repeatedly. That's not a convulsion. That's not a random movement. That describes something that looks, by all intents and purposes, intentional. And I don't know what to do with that. I've kind of sat with this story. I've known about it for a while, and I wanted to cover it. And that one detail specifically is one that I can't wrap my head around. There's no rational explanation for what would have caused that. None of the paranormal stuff really explains why that would have happened either. And what we know, what is documented is that 7 pretty experienced, well, 1 unbelievably experienced hiker, and then 6 very experienced hikers. So she's like S tier hiker, and they're like A, They entered this mountain range in early August 1993. They run into a severe storm. They spend the night cold and wet with no campfire. And then the next day, all of them except for 1 are dead. The autopsies don't make sense. The alleged causes of death don't make sense. And what's never explained is, like, the whole profile of symptoms that Uchenko described is not consistent with anything that the coroners came up with. The speed at which these deaths occurred is not explainable. The fact that the investigation was delayed by 2 weeks to find the bodies, I mean, again, there's an explanation for that. It's the whole bureaucracy shit that's not working. And then also, again, nobody takes any of this seriously, so they didn't care. The most plausible, like, conventional explanation to me is probably the toxic plant exposure. Or like some sort of waterborne thing, like if they were, I mean, they didn't say anything about snow. So it's not like they were just packing their canteens with snow and letting it melt, which can cause a plethora of health concerns if you don't boil it first. That's my, like, prepper brain kicking in, where it's like, oh no, you got to boil snow if you're going to drink it, because if not, you get worms and other nasty stuff that you don't want. But then again, the autopsies didn't show any of that either. And the fact that she survived and everybody else didn't. If they were all eating the same stuff, she should have gotten it too, but she never did. The nerve agent thing, I can't really rule out either, because the work was never really completed to test that. The geomagnetic and infrasound stuff might explain some of it, like the bruised lungs and other things like that. And then there's everything else, like all of the paranormal activity in the area, the anomalous zones, and all of this other stuff. The mountain spirits, the compass anomalies that they were running into, and the knowledge of people that have been there for centuries that this specific landscape does not want people in it. I don't know what to make of this. I do know that the case is technically closed, and it will probably never be reopened. And that makes me incredibly unhappy with the results of all of this. All it would take is somebody that's interested, that has the resources and the time and the knowledge to look at any of this stuff. They might be able to crack this thing wide open. Same with Dyatlov. But I don't think anybody ever will. And I think this is one of those things that may be better off unexplained. So, if you want to get some extra content attached to this episode, head over to Patreon, patreon.com/1159media. $5 a month gets you early access to History Goon. It gets you early access to all of the other shows that are there too. It's getting to the point that I can't name them all because there's so many. And you get it for $5. You get the OGs. You get 911 calls with the operator. You get the Never Daily with Sam and other people that are on there pretty regularly. You get Guestnicity with Luther, which is a fantastic show. And then you get some of our newcomers, like me. I'm kind of in that middle. I'm like the middle child, where I haven't been there long enough to be like one of the originals, and I'm not new enough to be one of the new guys. So I get that like middle child thing where they're like, this stuff's really cool and this stuff's really cool. Who are you? Like, oh, I'm their brother that you've met before. But some of the new shows we have on there, we've got my very good friends, David and Sarah at the Macabre Emporium. I'm going to plug their show because you have to check them out because I love them. They are two of the best people that I've met in this little hobby industry, whatever we want to call podcasting. You've got True Crime Tradies, which is, again, a fantastic show because they're Australian, so they have whimsical accents, and they watch horrific true crime documentaries and joke about them. So it's fun. And you've also got I Don't Care, which I have not yet listened to. I'm not a girly girl. I'm a history goon. So, and if you want to support me directly, I have a Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/historygoonpod. If you want to throw me some money, that comes to me directly to support what I do to keep the lights on here in the whatever my apartment is, and pay my internet bill so I can keep doing this. That's awesome. I'm not going to panhandle, so I'm not going to beg you for it. But if you think what I'm doing is worth $5, that's awesome, and I appreciate it. And if you don't want to give me money, you can give me the gift that keeps on giving. You can spread the word. You can like, share, and subscribe to this show. You can check me out on YouTube, which that would be good because I'm almost at 100 subscribers at this point. And the more the merrier, because I would like to start doing some like YouTube exclusive, like shorter content kind of stuff with more like fun video stuff that I have to learn how to do, you know? But the more the merrier. The more eyes and ears I get to this show, the better. And just spread the word like fleas or whatever. But we're going to wrap it up. We're all going to die someday. So go out and do some goon shit and leave a mark on the world. Just like the Khamar Daban mountain range Or maybe not like that. That's kind of bad. Okay, love you. Bye.